About Ambattha, pride humble. Kin ama true. Digha Nikaya, the long discourses about Ambattha, pride humble. Ambattha Sutta. Thus have I heard. Once the Lord was touring Kosala with a large number of monks, some 500, and he came to a Kosalan Brahmin village called Ikanankala. And he stayed in the dense jungle of Ikanankala. At that time the Brahmin Pakarasati was living at Yukata, a populous place, full of grass, timber, water and corn, which had been given to him by King Pasenadi of Kosala as a royal gift and with royal powers. And Pakarasati heard say, the ascetic Gautama, son of the Sakyans, who has gone forth from the Sakya clan, is staying in the dense jungle of Ikanankala. And concerning that blessed Lord a good report has been spread about. This blessed Lord is an arahant, a fully enlightened Buddha, perfected in knowledge and conduct, a well-farer, knower of the worlds, unequaled trainer of men to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, a Buddha, a blessed Lord. He proclaims this world with its gods, Maras, Brahmas, the world of ascetics and Brahmins with its princes and people, having come to know it by his own knowledge. He teaches a Dhamma that is lovely in its beginning, lovely in its middle, and lovely in its ending, in the spirit and in the letter. And he displays the fully perfected, thoroughly purified holy life. And indeed it is good to see such arahants. Now at that time Pakarasati had a pupil, the youth Ambattha, who was a student of the Vedas, who knew the mantras, perfected in the 3 Vedas, a skilled expounder of the rules and rituals, the lore of sounds and meanings and, fifthly, oral tradition, complete in philosophy and in the marks of a great man, admitted and accepted by his master in the 3 Vedas with the words, what I know, you know, what you know, I know. And Pakarasati said to Ambattha, Ambattha, my son, the ascetic Gautama, is staying in the dense jungle of Ikanankala. And concerning that blessed Lord a good report has been spread about. Now you go to see the ascetic Gautama and find out whether this report is correct or not. And whether the Reverend Gautama is as they say or not. In that way we shall put the Reverend Gautama to the test. Sir, how shall I find out whether the report is true? Or whether the Reverend Gautama is as they say or not? According to the tradition of our mantras, Ambattha, the great man who is possessed of the 32 marks of a great man has only 2 courses open to him. If he lives the household life he will become a ruler, a wheel-turning righteous monarch of the law, conqueror of the 4 quarters, who has established the security of his realm and is possessed of the 7 treasures. These are the wheel treasure, the elephant treasure, the householder treasure, the jewel treasure, the woman treasure, the householder treasure, and, as 7th, the counselor treasure. He has more than 1,000 sons who are heroes, of heroic stature, conquerors of the hostile army. He dwells having conquered this sea-girt land without stick or sword, by the law. But if he goes forth from the household life into homelessness, then he will become an arahant, a full enlightened Buddha, one who draws back the veil from the world. And, Ambattha, I am the passer-on of the mantras, and you are the receiver. Very good, sir, said Ambattha at Pakarasati's words, and he got up, passed by Pakarasati with his right side, got into his chariot drawn by a mare and, accompanied by a number of young men, headed for the dense jungle of Ikanankala. He drove as far as the carriage would go, then alighted and continued on foot. At that time a number of monks were walking up and down in the open air. Ambattha approached them and said, Where is the Reverend Gautama to be found just now? We have come to see the Reverend Gautama. The monks thought, This is Ambattha, a youth of good family and a pupil of the distinguished Brahmin Pakarasati. The Lord would not mind having a conversation with such a young man. And they said to Ambattha, that is his dwelling, with the door closed. Go quietly up to it, go on to the veranda without haste, cough, and knock on the bolt. The Lord will open the door to you. Ambattha went up to the dwelling and on to the veranda, coughed, and knocked. The Lord opened the door, and Ambattha went in. The young men entered, exchanged courtesies with the Lord, and sat down to one side. But Ambattha walked up and down while the Lord sat there, uttered some vague words of politeness, and then stood so speaking before the seated Lord. And the Lord said to Ambattha, well now, Ambattha, would you behave like this if you were talking to venerable and learned Brahmins, teachers of teachers? As you do with me, walking and standing while I am sitting, and uttering vague words of politeness? No, Reverend Gautama, a Brahmin should walk with a walking Brahmin, stand with a standing Brahmin, sit with a sitting Brahmin, and lie down with a Brahmin who is lying down. But as for those shaven little ascetics, menials, black scourings from Brahma's foot with them, it is fitting to speak just as I do with the Reverend Gautama. But, Ambattha, you came here seeking something. Whatever it was you came for, you should listen attentively to hear about it. Ambattha, you have not perfected your training. Your conceit of being trained is due to nothing but inexperience. But Ambattha was angry and displeased at being called untrained, and he turned on the Lord with curses and insults. Thinking, the ascetic Gautama bears me ill will, he said. Reverend Gautama, the Sakyans are fierce, rough-spoken, touchy and violent. Being of menial origin, being menials, they do not honor, respect, esteem, revere or pay homage to Brahmins. With regard to this, it is not proper that they do not pay homage to Brahmins. This was the first time Ambattha accused the Sakyans of being menials. But, Ambattha, what have the Sakyans done to you? Reverend Gautama, once I went to Kapilavatthu on some business for my teacher, the Brahmin Pakarasati, and I came to the Sakyans meeting hall. And at that time a lot of Sakyans were sitting on high seats in their meeting hall, poking each other with their fingers, laughing and playing about together, and it seemed to me that they were just making fun of me, and no one offered me a seat. With regard to this, it is not proper that they do not pay homage to the Brahmins. This was the second time Ambattha accused the Sakyans of being menials. But Ambattha, even the quail, that little bird, can talk as she likes on her own nest. Kapilavatthu is the Sakyans' home, Ambattha. They do not deserve censure for such a trifle. Reverend Gautama, there are 4 castes, the Khatiyas, the Brahmins, the merchants and the artisans. And of these 4 castes 3, the Khatiyas, the merchants and the artisans, are entirely subservient to the Brahmin. With regard to this, it is not proper that they should not pay homage to the Brahmins. This was the 3rd time Ambattha accused the Sakyans of being menials. Then the Lord thought, this young man goes too far in abusing the Sakyans. Suppose I were to ask after his clan name? So he said, Ambattha, what is your clan? I am a Kanhayan, Reverend Gautama. Ambattha, in former days, according to those who remember the ancestral lineage, the Sakyans were the masters. And you are descended from a slave girl of the Sakyans. For the Sakyans regard King Akaka, to whom his queen was dear and beloved, wishing to transfer the kingdom to her son, banished his elder brothers from the kingdom Akamuka, Karandu, Hathaniya and Sinapura, and these, being banished, made their home on the flank of the Himalayas beside a lotus pond, where there was a big grove of teak tress. and for fear of contaminating the stock they cohabited with their own sisters. Then King Akaka asked his ministers and counselors, "Where are the princes living now?" And they told him. At this King Akaka exclaimed, "They are strong as teak, Saka. These princes, they are real Sakyans." And that is how the Sakyans got their well-known name. And the king was the ancestor of the Sakyans. Now Akaka had a slave girl called Disa, who gave birth to a black child. The black thin, when it was born, exclaimed, "Wash me, mother, bath me, mother, deliver me from this dirt, and I will bring you profit." Because, Ambattha, just as people today use the term hobgoblin, pisaka, as a term of abuse, so in those days. They said black, kana. And they said, as soon as he was born, he spoke. He is born a kana, a hobgoblin. That is how in former days. The Sakyans were the masters, and you are descended from a slave girl of the Sakyans. On hearing this, the young men said, "Reverend Gautama, do not humiliate Ambattha too much with talk of his being descended from a slave girl. Ambattha is well born, of a good family, he is very learned, he is well spoken, a scholar, well able to hold his own in this discussion with the Reverend Gautama." Then the Lord said to the young men, "If you consider that Ambattha is ill-born, not of a good family, unlearned, ill-spoken, no scholar, unable to hold his own, in this discussion with the ascetic Gautama, then let Ambattha be silent, and you conduct this discussion with me. But if you think he is about to hold his own, then you be quiet, and let him discuss with me. Ambattha is well born, Reverend Gautama. We will be silent," he shall continue. Then the Lord said to Ambattha, "Ambattha, I have a fundamental question for you, which you will not like to answer. If you don't answer, or evade the issue, if you keep silent or go away, your head will split into 7 pieces. What do you think, Ambattha? Have you heard from old and venerable Brahmins, teachers of teachers, where the Kanhayans came from, or who was their ancestor?" At this, Ambattha remained silent. The Lord asked him a second time. Again Ambattha remained silent, and the Lord said, "Answer Ambattha, does not answer a fundamental question put to him by a Tathagata by the third asking has his head split into 7 pieces." And at that moment Vajirapani the Yaka, holding a huge iron club, flaming, ablaze and glowing, up in the sky just above Ambattha, was thinking, "If this young man Ambattha does not answer a proper question put to him by the blessed Lord by the third time of asking, I'll split his head into 7 pieces." The Lord saw Vajirapani, and so did Ambattha. And at the sight, Ambattha was terrified and unnerved, his hairs stood on end, and he sought protection, shelter and safety from the Lord. Crouching down close to the Lord, he said, "What did the Reverend Gautama say? May the Reverend Gautama repeat what he said." "What do you think, Ambattha? Have you heard who was the ancestor of the Kanhayans?" "Yes, I have heard it just as the Reverend Gautama said. That is where the Kanhayans came from, he was their ancestor." Hearing this, the young men made a loud noise and clamor. So Ambattha is ill-born, not of a good family, born of a slave girl of the Sakyans, and the Sakyans are Ambattha's masters. We disparaged the ascetic Gautama, thinking he was not speaking the truth. Then the Lord thought, "It is too much. The way these young men humiliate Ambattha for being the son of a slave girl. I must get him out of this." So he said to the young men, "Don't disparage Ambattha too much for being the son of a slave girl. That Kana was a mighty sage. He went to the south country, learnt the mantras of the Brahmins there, and then went to King Akaka and asked for his daughter Madarupi." And King Akaka, furiously angry, exclaimed, "So this fellow, the son of a slave girl, wants my daughter, and put an arrow to his bow. But he was unable either to shoot the arrow or to withdraw it. Then the ministers and counselors came to the sage Kana and said, "Spare the king, reverend sir, spare the king. The king will be safe, but if he looses the narrow downwards, the earth will quake, as far as his kingdom extends. Reverend sir, spare the kin, spare the land. The king and the land will be safe, but if he looses the arrow upwards, as far as his realm extends, the god will not let it rain for 7 years. Reverend sir, spare the king and the land, and may the god let it rains. The king and the land will be safe, and the god will let it rain, but if the king points the arrow at the crown prince, the prince will be completely safe." Then the ministers exclaimed, "Let King Akaka point the arrow at the crown prince, the prince will be perfectly safe." The king did so, and the prince was unharmed. Then King Akaka, terrified and fearful of divine punishment, gave away his daughter Matarupi. So, young men, do not disparage Ambattha too much for being the son of a slave girl. That Kana was a mighty sage. Then the Lord said, "Ambattha, what do you think? Suppose a Khattiya youth were to wed a Brahmin maiden, and there was a son of the union. Would that son of a Khattiya youth and a Brahmin maiden receive a seat and water from the Brahmins?" "He would, Reverend Gautama." "Would they allow him to eat at funeral rites, at rice offerings, at sacrifices, or as a guest?" "They would, Reverend Gautama." "Would they teach him mantras or not?" "They would, Reverend Gautama." "Would they keep their women covered or uncovered?" "Uncovered, Reverend Gautama." "But would the Khattiyas sprinkle him with the Khattiya consecration?" "No, Reverend Gautama." "Why not?" "Because, Reverend Gautama, he is not well born on his mother's side." "What do you think, Ambattha? Suppose a Brahmin youth were to wed a Khattiya maiden, and there was a son of the union. Would that son of a Khattiya youth and a Brahmin maiden receive a seat and water from the Brahmins?" "He would, Reverend Gautama." "But would the Khattiyas sprinkle him with the Khattiya consecration?" "No, Reverend Gautama." "Why not?" "Because, Reverend Gautama, he is not well born on his father's side." So, Ambattha, the Khattiyas, through a man taking a woman or a woman taking a man, are senior to the Brahmins. What do you think, Ambattha? Take the case of a Brahmin who, for some reason, has had his head shaved by the Brahmins, has been punished with a bag of ashes and banished from the country or the city. Would he receive a seat and water from the Brahmins? No, Reverend Gautama. Would they allow him to eat as a guest? No, Reverend Gautama. Would they teach him mantras, or not? They would not, Reverend Gautama. Would they keep their women covered or uncovered? Covered, Reverend Gautama. What do you think, Ambattha? Take the case of a Khattiya who had his head shaved by the Khattiyas and has been banished from the country or the city. Would he receive a seat and water from the Brahmins? He would, Reverend Gautama, as verse 24. Would they keep their women covered or uncovered? Uncovered, Reverend Gautama. But that Khattiya has so far reached the extreme of humiliation that he has been banished from the country or the city. So even if a Khattiya has suffered extreme humiliation, he is superior and the Brahmins inferior. Ambattha. This verse was pronounced by Brahma Sanankumara. The Khattiya is best among those who value clan, he with knowledge and conduct is best of gods and men. This verse was rightly sung, not wrongly, rightly spoken, not wrongly, connected with profit, not unconnected. And, Ambattha, I too say this. The Khattiya is best among those who value clan, he with knowledge and conduct is best of gods and men. End of first recitation section. But, Reverend Gautama, what is this conduct, what is this knowledge? Ambattha, it is not from the standpoint of the attainment of unexcelled knowledge. and conduct that reputation based on birth and clan is declared, nor on the conceit which says, "You are worthy of me, you are not worthy of me." For wherever there is a giving, a taking, or a giving and taking in marriage, there is always this talk and this conceit. But those who are enslaved by such things are far from the attainment of the unexcelled knowledge and conduct, which is attained by abandoning all such things. But, Reverend Gautama, what is this conduct, what is this knowledge? Ambattha, a Tathagata arises in this world, and Arahant, fully enlightened Buddha, endowed with wisdom and conduct, well-farer, knower of the worlds, incomparable trainer of men to be tame, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened and blessed. He, having realized it by his own super-know and blessed. He, having realized it by his own super-knowledge, proclaims this world with its devas, maras and brahmas, its princes and people. He preaches the Dhamma which is lovely in its beginning, lovely in its middle, lovely in its ending, in the spirit and in the letter, and displays the fully perfected and purified holy life. A disciple goes forth and practices the moralities. Sutta 2, verse 41 to 62. He guards the sense doors, etc. Sutta 2, verse 64 to 75, attains the 4 jhanas. Sutta 2, verse 75 to 82. Thus he develops conduct. He attains various insights. Sutta 2, verse 83 to 95, and the cessation of the corruptions. Sutta 2, verse 97. And beyond this there is no further development of knowledge and conduct that is higher or more perfect. But, Ambattha, in the pursuit of this unexcelled attainment of knowledge and conduct there are 4 paths of failure. What are they? In the first place, an ascetic or Brahmin who has not managed to gain this unexcelled attainment, takes his carrying pole, and plunges into the depths of the forest thinking, "I will live on windfalls." But in this way he only becomes an attendant on one who has attained. This is the first path of failure. Again, an ascetic or Brahmin, being unable to live on windfalls, takes a spade and basket, thinking, "I will live on tubers and roots." This is the second path of failure. Again, an ascetic or Brahmin, being unable to live on tubers and roots, makes a fire hearth at the edge of a village or small town and sits tending the flame. This is the third path of failure. Again, an ascetic or Brahmin, being unable to tend the flame, erects a house with 4 doors at the crossroads thinking, "Whatever ascetic or Brahmin arrives from the 4 quarters, I will honor to the best of my strength and ability." But in this way he only becomes an attendant on one who has attained to unexcelled knowledge and conduct. This is the 4th path of failure. What do you think, Ambattha? Do you and your teacher live in accordance with this unexcelled knowledge and conduct? No indeed, Reverend Gautama. Who are my teacher and I in comparison? We are far from it. Well then, Ambattha, could you and your teacher, being unable to gain this, go with your carrying poles into the depths of the forest, intending to live on windfalls? No indeed, Reverend Gautama. Well then, Ambattha, could you and your teacher, being unable to gain this, live on tubers and roots, sit tending the flame, erect a house? No indeed, Reverend Gautama. And so, Ambattha, not only are you and your teacher incapable of attaining this unexcelled knowledge and conduct, but even the 4 paths of failure are beyond you. And yet you and your teacher the Brahman Pakarasati utter these words. These shaven little ascetics, menials, black scrapings from Brahma's foot, what converse can they have with Brahmins learned in the 3 Vedas? Even though you can't even manage the duties of one who has failed. See, Ambattha, how your teacher has let you down. Ambattha, the Brahman Pakarasati lives by the grace and favor of King Pasenadi of Kosala. And yet the king does not allow him to have audience face to face. When he confers with the king, it is through a curtain. Why should the king not grant audience face to one on whom he has bestowed a proper and blameless source of revenue? See how your teacher has let you down. What do you think, Ambattha? Suppose King Pasenadi was sitting on the neck of an elephant or on horseback, or was standing on the chariot mat, conferring with his ministers and princes about something. And suppose he were to step aside and some workman or workman's servant were to come along and stand in his place. And standing there he might say, "This is what King Pasenadi of Kosala says." Would he be speaking the king's words as if he were the king's equal? No indeed, Reverend Gautama. Well then, Ambattha, it is just the same thing. Those who were, as you say, the first sages of the Brahmins, the makers and expounders of the mantras, whose ancient verses are chanted, pronounced and collected by the Brahmins of today, Ataka, Vamaka, Vamadeva, Vesamita, Yamataji, Angirasa, Bharadvaja, Vasetha, Kasapa, Bhagu, whose mantras are said to be passed on to you and your teacher. Yet you do not thereby become a sage or one practiced in the way of a sage. Such a thing is not possible. What do you think, Ambattha? What have you heard said by Brahmins who are venerable, aged, the teachers of teachers? Those first sages, Ataka, Bhagu, did they enjoy themselves, well bathed, perfumed, their hair and beards trimmed, adorned with garlands and wreaths, dressed in white cloths, indulging in the pleasures of the five senses and addicted to them, as you and your teacher do now? No, Reverend Gautama. Or did they eat special fine rice, with the black spots removed, with various soups and curries, as you and your teacher do know? No, Reverend Gautama. Or did they amuse themselves with women, dressed up in flounces and furbelows, as you and your teacher do now? No, Reverend Gautama. Or did they ride around in chariots drawn by mares with braided tails, that they urged on with long goad sticks? No, Reverend Gautama. Or did they have themselves guarded in fortified towns with palisades and barricades, by men with long swords? No, Reverend Gautama. So, Ambattha, neither you nor your teacher are a sage, or one trained in the way of a sage. And now, as for your doubts and perplexities concerning me, we will clarify these by your asking me, and by my answering your questions. Then, descending from his lodging, the Lord started to walk up and down, and Ambattha did likewise. And as he walked along with the Lord, Ambattha looked out for the 32 marks of a great man on the Lord's body, and he could see all of them except for 2. He was in doubt and perplexity about 2 of these marks. He could not make up his mind or be certain about the sheathed genitals or the large tongue. And the Lord, being aware of his doubts, effected by his psychic power that Ambattha could see his sheathed genitals, and then, sticking out his tongue, he reached out to lick both ears and both nostrils, and then covered the whole circle of his forehead with his tongue. The Ambattha thought, the ascetic Gautama is equipped with all the 32 marks of a great man, complete and with none missing. Then he said to the Lord, Reverend Gautama, may I go now? I have much business, much to do. Ambattha, do what you now think fit. So Ambattha got back into his chariot drawn by mares and departed. Meanwhile the Brahmin Pakarasati had gone outside and was sitting in his park with a large number of Brahmins, just waiting for Ambattha. Then Ambattha came to the park. He rode in the chariot as far as it would go, and then continued on foot to where Pakarasati was, saluted him, and sat down to one side. Then Pakarasati said, Well, dear boy, did you see the Reverend Gautama? I did, sir. And was the Reverend Gautama such as he is reported to be, and not otherwise? And is he of such nature, and not otherwise? Sir, he is as he is reported to be, and he is of such nature, and not otherwise. He is possessed of the 32 marks of a great man, all complete, with none missing. But was there any conversation between you and the ascetic Gautama? There was, sir. And what was this conversation about? So Ambattha told Pakarasati all that had passed between the Lord and himself. At this Pakarasati exclaimed, "Well, you're a fine little scholar, a fine wise man, a fine expert in the 3 Vedas. Anyone going about his business like that ought when he dies, at the breaking up of the body, to go to the downfall, to the evil path, to ruin, to hell. You have heaped insults on the Reverend Gautama, as a result of which he has brought up more and more things against us. You're a fine little scholar." He was so angry and enraged that he kicked Ambattha over, and wanted to start out at once to see the Lord. But the Brahmins said, "It is far too late, sir, to go to see the ascetic Gautama today. The Reverend Pakarasati should go to see him tomorrow." Then Pakarasati, having had fine hard and soft food prepared in his own home, set out by the light of torches from Ukatha, form the jungle of Ikanankala. He went by chariot as far as possible, then continued on foot to where the Lord was. Having exchanged courtesies with the Lord, he sat down to one side and said, "Venerable Gautama, did not our pupil Ambattha come to see you?" "He did, Brahman." "And was there any conversation between you?" "There was." "And what was this conversation about?" Then the Lord told Pakarasati all that had passed between him and Ambattha. At this, Pakarasati said to the Lord, "Reverend Gautama, Ambattha is a young fool. May the Reverend Gautama pardon him." "Brahman, may Ambattha be happy." Then Pakarasati looked out for the 32 marks of a Greta man on the Lord's body, and he could see all of them except for 2, the sheathed genitals and the large tongue. But the Lord set his mind at rest about these, as verse 11 to 12. And Pakarasati said to the Lord, "May the Reverend Gautama accept a meal from me today together with his order of monks." And the Lord consented by silence. Seeing his acceptance, Pakarasati said to the Lord, "It is time, Reverend Gautama, the meal is ready." And the Lord, having dressed in the early morning, and taken his robe and bowl, went with his order of monks to Pakarasati's residence, and sat down on the prepared seat. Then Pakarasati personally served the Lord with choice hard and soft food, and the young men served the monks. And when the Lord had taken his hand from the bowl, Pakarasati sat down to one side on a low stool. And as Pakarasati sat there, the Lord delivered a graduated discourse on generosity, on morality and on heaven, showing the danger, degradation and corruption of sense desires, and the profit of renunciation. And when the Lord knew that Pakarasati's mind was ready, pliable, free from the hindrances, joyful and calm, then he preached a sermon on Dhamma in brief, on suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path. And just as a clean cloth from which all stains have been removed receives the dye perfectly, so in the Brahman Pakarasati, as he sat there, there arose the pure and spotless Dhamma, and he knew whatever things have an origin must come to cessation. And Pakarasati, having seen, attained, experienced and penetrated the Dhamma, having passed beyond doubt, transcended uncertainty, having gained perfect confidence in the teacher's doctrine without relying on others, said, "Excellent, Lord, excellent." It is as if someone were to set up what had been knocked down, or to point out the way to one who had got lost, or to bring an oil lamp into a dark place, so that those with eyes could see what was there. Just so the Blessed Lord has expounded the Dhamma in various ways. I go with my son, my wife, my ministers and counselors for refuge to the Reverend Gautama, to the Dhamma and to the Sangha. May the Reverend Gautama accept me as a lay follower who has taken refuge from this day forth as long as life shall last. And whenever the Reverend Gautama visits other families or lay followers in Yukatha, may he also visit the family of Pakarasati. Whatever young men and maidens are there will revere the Reverend Gautama and rise before him, will give him a seat and water and will be glad at heart. And that will be for their welfare and happiness for a long time. Well said, Brahmin. Adi Da Fat TV